A young female nurse got pregnant from a homeless man. Everyone was making fun of her, but when people came to know the truth, everyone was stunned. Before this, subscribe to the channel so that you can be the first to know such a romantic story. Emma, a young nurse in her late 20s, had always been passionate about her work. She found meaning in the long shifts at the bustling city hospital, where she was known for her dedication, empathy, and professionalism. The fast-paced environment of the hospital suited her, and her colleagues respected her for her ability to stay calm in stressful situations. Patients always felt comforted by her presence, and she took pride in knowing she made a difference in people's lives. But Emma's personal life had recently taken an unexpected and overwhelming turn. A brief, impulsive encounter with a homeless man had left her pregnant. It was a situation she hadn't planned for, and one that filled her with confusion and fear. Emma knew the news would be a shock to her family and co-workers, and she dreaded the judgment she might face if they found out. The burden of carrying such a life-changing secret began to weigh heavily on her. At first, Emma managed to hide the pregnancy well. She continued her daily routines at the hospital as though nothing had changed, but as the weeks passed, subtle changes in her body became harder to conceal. She noticed her stomach beginning to swell, her face taking on a soft glow, and her clothes fitting more tightly. Each morning, as she pulled her scrubs over her growing belly, she felt a deep sense of dread, fearing that today might be the day someone noticed. The hospital, normally a place of healing, soon felt like a battleground. Emma could feel the eyes of her colleagues lingering on her longer than usual, and the whispers in the break room seemed to hush whenever she walked in. Some of her co-workers, who had once been friendly and supportive, began to distance themselves. Her supervisor, a strict and often unsympathetic woman, was particularly cold. Emma couldn't be sure if her boss had already guessed her secret, but the disapproving looks and sharp tone suggested that something was amiss. Patients, too, were beginning to pick up on Emma's situation. One elderly woman who had always been warm and kind asked her one day, "Are you expecting, dear? You have that glow." Though the comment was made in kindness, it sent a wave of panic through Emma. How much longer could she keep this hidden? As the pregnancy progressed, the gossip intensified. Emma overheard conversations about her in the hallways, some filled with pity, others dripping with cruelty. The isolation she felt grew deeper each day as the weight of her secret pressed down on her. Despite the judgment and whispers, Emma remained determined to keep going. Her love for nursing, for helping others, was her anchor in the storm. But the question that loomed over her was how long she could continue to manage both worlds: the devoted nurse, respected for her skills, and the vulnerable woman with a secret that could shatter her reputation. The suspense of living on the edge, of waiting for the inevitable revelation, gnawed at her every day. Emma could never forget the night she met the homeless man. It was late, and she was on her way home after another exhausting shift at the hospital. The air was cold, and the streets were nearly empty, save for a few cars and the occasional passerby. As she walked toward her apartment, she noticed him sitting on the sidewalk, his back against the wall of a convenience store, wrapped in a tattered coat that barely seemed to keep out the chill. His hair was disheveled, his face dirty, and his eyes hollow with exhaustion and hunger. Most people passed by without a second glance, but Emma couldn't. She had always been drawn to those in need, her heart unable to ignore someone's suffering. In that moment, something inside her stirred, a mix of compassion and empathy. She hesitated, knowing it was late and not the safest time to stop, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this man needed help. Approaching him cautiously, Emma knelt beside him. "Are you okay?" she asked gently, her voice filled with concern. He looked up at her, his eyes meeting hers. For a brief second, she saw more than just desperation. There was a flicker of something deeper, pain, loneliness, maybe even shame. He didn't say much, just nodded weakly. Emma quickly realized that he wasn't just cold, he was hungry. Without a second thought, she stood and went into the nearby store, buying him a sandwich and a bottle of water. When she handed it to him, he accepted with trembling hands. "Thank you," he mumbled, his voice rough and barely audible. Emma stayed with him for a few more minutes, making sure he ate. They didn't exchange many words, but there was something about the encounter that left a mark on her. It wasn't pity she felt for him, but a deep sadness for the way life could break people down. After a while, she got up to leave, offering him one last reassuring smile before walking away into the night. At the time, Emma thought little of it. It was just a fleeting moment, an act of kindness, like many others she had done. But as the days passed, she couldn't stop thinking about him. His eyes, the way he had looked at her. There was something unsettling about the encounter, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. Weeks later, when Emma realized her period was late, the encounter came rushing back to her. She hadn't given it much thought at first, chalking up the delay to stress or exhaustion from work. But as the days dragged on, a gnawing fear grew inside her. She bought a pregnancy test, her hands shaking as she waited for the results. When the test confirmed what she had feared, Emma was overwhelmed with horror and confusion. She stood frozen in the bathroom, staring at the 2 pink lines on the test strip, her heart pounding in her chest. How had this happened? She hadn't been with anyone in months, except for that one strange night, but that couldn't have been it, could it? Her mind raced as she tried to piece together what had happened, but the memory of that night with the homeless man was hazy. She remembered his desperate eyes, the cold air, the food she had given him. But nothing else made sense. How could a simple act of kindness turn her world upside down like this? As the days went on, Emma became consumed by the mystery of her pregnancy. She couldn't bring herself to tell anyone, not her family, not her friends, not even her colleagues at the hospital. The shame of it, the questions she didn't have answers to, were too much to bear. How could she explain something she didn't even understand herself? And so, Emma kept the secret buried deep within her, carrying the weight of her confusion and fear alone. The encounter with the homeless man, once a distant memory, now haunted her every day as she grappled with the reality of her situation and the uncertainty of what would come next. As Emma's pregnancy progressed, so did the whispers around her. At first, the comments were subtle, barely noticeable. A lingering glance, a whispered conversation that fell silent when she entered the room. But soon the gossip became more direct, cutting through her like shards of glass. It started with a group of nurses in the break room. Emma overheard them one morning as she walked in, her back still sore from the long night shift. One of them, a nurse she had once considered a friend, was laughing as she spoke. "Did you hear about Emma? I mean, how does someone like her even get pregnant? She doesn't even have a boyfriend." Another nurse chimed in. "It's probably some random guy she hooked up with. She's always so secretive. I bet she's too embarrassed to admit it." Emma froze in the doorway, her heart sinking into her stomach. She had never felt more alone. Every glance, every whisper seemed to carry the weight of judgment. She had tried so hard to keep her secret, to avoid the inevitable stares and snide remarks, but now it felt like her entire world was closing in on her. At first, she thought she could ignore it, rise above the gossip, but as the days went by, the comments became more frequent, more vicious. Her supervisor, already a stern and cold woman, seemed to delight in making things harder for her. "Emma, you're looking a bit distracted these days," she would say with a smirk. "Maybe you should focus more on your work and less on whatever else you've got going on." Emma knew exactly what her supervisor meant. It was clear that the rumors had spread through the hospital like wildfire. Every patient interaction, every shift felt like a test of her resilience. Some of the patients even made their own remarks, asking her personal questions she wasn't prepared to answer. "Are you sure you should be working in your condition?" one elderly man asked her one day, his tone more condescending than concerned. The weight of the judgment was suffocating. Emma found herself dreading work, the place that had once been her refuge. The long shifts became unbearable as she navigated the cruel remarks and icy stares. She started to question everything, her career, her decisions, even her self-worth. Was she really as terrible as they made her feel? Had she made a mistake so big that it now defined her in their eyes? The strain became too much. There were moments when she would retreat to the bathroom between shifts, locking herself in a stall just to breathe, to stop the tears from falling. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, her once bright eyes now dull with exhaustion and hurt. The proud, confident nurse who had once thrived in the chaos of the hospital was fading, replaced by someone she barely recognized. Emma began to wonder if it was time to leave. Could she keep working in a place where she felt so judged and humiliated? Every shift was a reminder of her isolation, of how cruel people could be when they didn't understand someone's situation. She thought about quitting altogether, just walking away from it all and starting fresh somewhere new, somewhere where no one knew her secret. But deep down there was a part of Emma that resisted the idea of giving up. Nursing was more than just a job to her. It was a calling, a part of who she was. Could she really walk away from something she had worked so hard for just because of the judgments of others? The tension in her life, both at work and within herself, continued to build. Each day was a battle between her love for her work and the crushing weight of the judgment surrounding her. Emma was left standing at a crossroads, unsure of what to do next, but knowing that something had to change soon. As Emma's pregnancy progressed, something strange began to happen. At first, the changes were subtle, easy to dismiss as the normal side effects of pregnancy. She started having vivid dreams that felt more real than anything she had ever experienced. In these dreams, she wasn't just watching events unfold, she was living them, feeling every emotion, every sensation as if she were awake. Sometimes, she dreamt of places she had never been, of people she had never met, yet everything felt familiar, almost like memories. Then came the heightened senses. It started with her sense of smell. Emma could suddenly detect scents from far away, distinguishing between the faintest of aromas. In the hospital, she could smell the antiseptic in the air more intensely, and even the faint scent of coffee brewing in the break room from several floors away. Her hearing sharpened too. She could overhear conversations from across the room, pick up on the smallest of sounds, like the tapping of fingers on a keyboard or the rustling of paper in a distant hallway. These heightened senses left her on edge, overwhelmed by stimuli she couldn't escape. But the most unnerving sensation was the sense of power that seemed to surge through her body. It was unlike anything she had ever felt before, a subtle but undeniable force. Sometimes, when she focused, she could feel energy flowing through her, almost as if her body was holding something extraordinary. It scared her, but at the same time, it was oddly comforting, as if some unknown strength was protecting her. Emma knew something wasn't right. These were not normal pregnancy symptoms. She tried to convince herself it was all in her head, but when she went for her routine checkup, even the doctors were perplexed. The scans and tests didn't make sense. The baby's development was normal in many ways, but there were abnormalities that the medical team couldn't explain. On the ultrasound, the fetus appeared to glow faintly, an unusual phenomenon that left the doctors baffled. Blood tests revealed strange markers, things that no one had seen before. They ran the tests again and again, trying to make sense of the data, but the results remained the same. Emma's pregnancy was unlike anything they had ever encountered. As word spread through the hospital about her unusual condition, the once judgmental whispers turned to concern. Doctors and specialists from various departments began consulting on her case, each more confused than the last. Some believed it was a rare medical anomaly, while others hinted at more fantastical explanations. The uncertainty made Emma feel like an exhibit, with doctors studying her as if she were part of some bizarre experiment. Despite their growing concern, no one could give Emma answers. The more tests they ran, the more questions arose. Why were her senses so heightened? Why did she feel this inexplicable surge of energy? What was happening to her body and, more importantly, to the baby she carried? Her colleagues, once gossiping behind her back, now approached her with caution, their faces filled with unease. Even her supervisor, once cold and judgmental, seemed unsettled by the mysterious nature of her pregnancy. The tension in the hospital grew as more people speculated about what could be causing these strange phenomena. Was it something supernatural? Some began to wonder if there was more to the encounter with the homeless man than Emma had initially thought. The idea gnawed at her, but she couldn't bring herself to believe it. And yet, every night, as the vivid dreams intensified, she couldn't shake the feeling that something beyond the realm of normalcy was happening to her. The suspense of it all weighed heavily on Emma. She had no control over what was happening to her body or the strange experiences she was having. Each day brought more uncertainty, leaving her to wonder, was this just a rare medical complication? Or was something far more mysterious unfolding inside her? With each passing day, the sense of the unknown grew stronger, and Emma found herself caught between two worlds. One of science, where everything could be explained, and another of mystery, where nothing made sense. All she knew for certain was that her life and the life of her unborn child would never be the same again. One cold, quiet evening, as Emma sat in her small apartment, a knock on the door startled her. She hadn't been expecting anyone. Her days had been filled with doctor's appointments and strange dreams, and, by the end of each day, she craved solitude. The knock came again, louder this time, and, with a feeling of unease, she slowly rose from her chair and approached the door. When she opened it, her breath caught in her throat. Standing before her was the homeless man, the same man she had met all those months ago on the street. But something was different about him. His appearance, once ragged and unkempt, had transformed. His clothes, once dirty and torn, were now pristine, and his face, though still familiar, was no longer hollow and tired. There was a strange confidence in his eyes, a sharpness that made Emma step back in confusion. "You," Emma stammered, her mind racing. "What are you doing here?" The man smiled softly, his gaze steady. "I think it's time we talked, Emma." Her heart pounded as she stepped aside to let him in, her thoughts spinning. What could he possibly have to say? Why had he come back now after all this time? They sat in silence for a moment, the tension thick in the air. Finally, the man spoke, his voice calm and measured. "I know you have questions. About that night we met, about everything that's happened since." Emma nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She had been haunted by that brief encounter for months, but nothing had prepared her for what he was about to reveal. "My name isn't important," he began, "but what you need to know is that I'm not who you think I am. The night we met, I wasn't truly homeless. I was there for a reason." He paused, watching her reaction carefully. "I've been watching over you for a long time, Emma. Longer than you realize." Emma's stomach twisted. "What do you mean? Watching me? Why?" The man sighed, as if the weight of what he was about to say burdened him. "It wasn't by chance that I was there that night. I've been following your life for years, waiting for the right moment to intervene. What happened between us was meant to happen." Her mind raced, the shock of his words hitting her like a wave. "Meant to happen? You're saying this was planned?" Emma's voice wavered with disbelief and anger. "Yes," he said, his tone steady. "I know this is hard to understand, but there's more to this than you know. I come from a place, a family, with more influence and power than you could imagine. My appearance that night was a test of sorts, a way to see if you were who I thought you were." Emma stared at him, her mind reeling. "But why? Why me?" The man leaned forward, his eyes locking with hers. "Because you're special, Emma. There's something about you that goes beyond what you see in yourself. Your kindness, your compassion, your strength in the face of everything that's happened. You've passed every test." Her head spun as she tried to process his words. "Tests? What kind of tests? What are you talking about?" He sighed again, this time more heavily. "It's complicated, but my family has been involved in something ancient. We've been protectors of certain secrets, and your child, our child, is connected to something far bigger than either of us. That's why I've been watching you. That's why I had to be sure." Emma's heart raced as the gravity of his words sank in. Everything she had experienced, her pregnancy, the strange symptoms, the unexplainable power she had begun to feel, it all started to make sense, but in a way that terrified her. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What does this mean for me? For our baby?" The man's expression softened. "It means your life is about to change, Emma. Our child is destined for something extraordinary, and so are you. But with that comes great responsibility and danger. I'm here to help you, to protect you both. But there's much more you'll need to learn." Emma sat in stunned silence, her entire world shifting in an instant. Everything she thought she knew about herself, about her pregnancy, had been turned upside down. And as she looked into the man's eyes, she realized that her journey was only just beginning. The revelation left her both fearful and curious, unsure of what her future held, but one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. As Emma's pregnancy reached its final stages, the hospital staff was on edge. Doctors, nurses, and even specialists who had never seen such a case before watched her closely. The strange symptoms she had experienced, the vivid dreams, heightened senses, and unexplained energy, had only intensified as her due date approached. The tests and scans continued to show abnormalities, but no one could give her a definitive answer about what was happening. The day of the birth arrived, and the tension in the delivery room was palpable. Emma could feel it in the air. The weight of something extraordinary was about to happen. As she lay in the hospital bed, her body exhausted yet filled with a strange sense of calm, she knew that this moment was not just about bringing her child into the world. It was about something much bigger. The delivery, though difficult, went smoothly. But when the baby was finally born, the room fell silent. The nurses and doctors who had seen countless births stood frozen in awe. There was something different about this child, something beyond comprehension. The newborn, a boy, opened his eyes almost immediately wide and alert, as if he was already aware of the world around him. His gaze was intense, almost unsettling. It felt as if he was looking straight into the hearts of everyone in the room, understanding them in ways no newborn should be able to. The doctors checked him over, their hands trembling slightly, but they found no health issues. Physically, he was perfect. But there was no denying that this child was far from ordinary. Emma, exhausted yet filled with wonder, held her son for the first time. As she cradled him in her arms, she felt a deep connection unlike anything she had ever known. The strange energy she had sensed during her pregnancy seemed to flow from him now, surrounding them both. His tiny hand reached up and touched her face, and in that moment, Emma felt as if she understood everything. Every doubt, every fear, every mystery that had surrounded her for the past 9 months. It all made sense, though the full scope of it was still beyond her grasp. The hospital staff whispered about the child, unable to explain what they had witnessed. Some of the more superstitious nurses murmured about miracles or something divine. Others simply shook their heads, too perplexed to offer any rational explanation. Even the doctors, so rooted in science, seemed shaken by the birth of this extraordinary baby. As word spread through the hospital, Emma began to feel the weight of eyes on her once again, but this time it was different. It wasn't judgment or scorn, but awe. People who had once gossiped about her, who had dismissed her as a woman caught in a scandal, now looked at her with a kind of reverence. They didn't know the full truth of what had happened, but they sensed that something far beyond their understanding had touched Emma's life. A few days later, Emma was discharged from the hospital. She walked out with her newborn son cradled in her arms, her steps lighter than they had been in months. She no longer cared about the stares or the whispers. She was no longer the woman everyone had doubted, the woman people had judged and dismissed. She was a mother now, and she had brought something extraordinary into the world, something that would change not just her life, but perhaps the world itself. As Emma left the hospital, the homeless man's words echoed in her mind. Our child is destined for something extraordinary. She couldn't shake the feeling that the mysterious man, whoever he truly was, had known this all along. He had been watching her, guiding her, and now she was beginning to understand why. The child she carried was no ordinary baby, and his future held something far greater than she could yet comprehend. The story didn't end with the birth of her son. It was only the beginning. As Emma stepped into the sunlight, holding her child close, she felt a sense of purpose and strength she had never known before. She had defied everyone's expectations, but more than that, she had embraced a destiny she hadn't even known was hers. As she disappeared into the city streets, her heart filled with a strange combination of love, fear, and anticipation. The reader is left wondering, who was the homeless man really? And what did the future hold for Emma and her extraordinary child? The answers to those questions remained shrouded in mystery, leaving a sense of awe and wonder in their wake.